Russia is on a slow march towards Kiev. Its missiles are targeting Ukrainian defenses. Its aircraft are taking out Ukrainian positions. Gradually, Russia's air superiority is coming to the fore. So does Ukraine have a plan to counter it? It does. It's called a no-fly zone. President Zelensky is adamant about it. He wants NATO to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine. First of all, what exactly is a no-fly zone? Think of it as a no-entry sign in the air. Enemy aircraft will not be permitted to enter the no-fly zones, and if they do, there will be retaliation. They can be warned, they can be escorted away, and in the worst-case scenario, they can be shot down. And Zelensky wants NATO to impose this no-fly zone over Ukraine, basically stop Russian jets from flying in. But there is just one problem here. NATO is simply not interested. And why is that? The problem with a no-fly zone is implementing it. Let's assume NATO does close off Ukrainian airspace. What happens if Russian jets violate it? NATO pilots will go nose to nose with Russian jets.
The only way to actually implement something like a no-fly zone is to send NATO planes into Ukrainian airspace and to shoot down Russian planes, and that could lead to a full-fledged war in Europe. President Biden has been clear that we are not going to get into a war with Russia, but we are going to tremendous lengths with allies and partners to provide Ukrainians with the means to effectively defend themselves.
So NATO wants to contain the war. It has no intention of escalating it. This may seem like the rational choice here, but Volodymyr Zelensky is a desperate leader right now. He needs all the military support that he can get, and which is why he lashed out at NATO's decision. Zelensky's words were pointed. He said NATO would be responsible for any Ukrainian casualties in the future.
Today was the NATO summit, a weak summit, a confused summit, a summit that shows that not everyone considers the fight for freedom in Europe to be the #1 goal. And what did you think about during that meeting? People who die from now on will also die because of you, because of your weakness, because of your disunity.
He is not mincing his words. And remember, NATO is Zelensky's biggest ally, his best hope to repel Russian soldiers. So what does this tell you about Ukraine's position? 1, the Russian advance may be slow, but it is relentless. And 2, Ukraine overestimated NATO's commitment. Diplomatically, the alliance has been isolating Russia. Financially, the sanctions have been imposed. But what about military support? That is where Ukraine was counting on more NATO assistance. Does that mean NATO should impose a no-fly zone? Most experts say no. Russia versus Ukraine is a conventional war. Russia versus NATO has echoes of a nuclear war. More countries will be dragged in, more soldiers, more weapons. The Russian president had this warning for the Western leaders. Listen in.
Now we are hearing that a no-fly zone must be established over the territory of Ukraine. It is impossible to do so over the territory of Ukraine itself. It is possible only from the territory of some neighboring countries. But any move in this direction will be viewed by us as a participation in the armed conflict, of whichever side whose territory will pose a threat to our service members. That very second, we will view them as participants of the military conflict, and it would not matter what members they are.
And that is a clear message from Putin. If you impose a no-fly zone, you are joining the war. And right now, NATO does not want to be a part of this war, clearly. So what options does the alliance have? 1 is to prop up Ukraine's own air defense. How can they do that? By providing more fighter jets, by sending more missile systems. NATO seems to be moving in that direction. Last month, the European Union promised to send fighter jets to Ukraine. Ukrainian pilots were dispatched to fly the jets. But suddenly, the deal stalled. The fighter jets remained grounded. It took another appeal from Volodymyr Zelensky to grease the wheels. This time, his temperament was different. He said, if you cannot impose a no-fly zone, at least send your jets.
The world is strong enough to close our skies to Russian missiles, fighter jets and helicopters. But if someone still has doubts, then Ukraine needs planes. It's easy actually when you have the will in order to make Ukraine and European skies safe.
And the obvious candidate to provide these planes is Poland. It has a fleet of Soviet-made MiG fighters. Ukrainian pilots have flown them before, so no additional training will be required. But there is one problem. If Poland offers these jets, its air force will become weaker. And with Russia marching through Ukraine, it will worry Poland. So what is the solution? America could fill the gap in Poland's air force, basically replace the MiG fighters that are given to Ukraine. American media is reporting a three-way deal. Poland gives MiG fighters to Ukraine and the US gives F-16 jets to Poland.
We're looking actively now at the question of airplanes that Poland may provide to Ukraine, and looking at how we might be able to backfill should Poland decide to produce those, supply those planes.
This seems to be NATO's game plan. Flood Ukraine with lethal military aid, missiles, jets, air defense systems. In less than a week, the US has shipped 17,000 anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. They have a fixed route, airlift to Poland and Romania, and transport by road into Ukraine. This is a long-term strategy. For starters, it will delay Russia's victory, increase the cost of war, and secondly, it lays the ground for any insurgency. Even if Ukraine loses, the Western weapons will fuel resistance. The question is, could this backfire? Will Russia see this as NATO entering the war? It is certainly possible. We just showed you Vladimir Putin's warning on imposing a no-fly zone. He had something similar to say on sanctions.
By the way, these sanctions that are being imposed, they are akin to declaring war. But thank God we haven't gotten there yet. I think our so-called quote-unquote partners still have an understanding of what the ramifications and threats to everybody could be.
This is a tightrope for both NATO and Russia. If Vladimir Putin retaliates, NATO will activate Article 5 of its charter. All 30 NATO members will declare war on Russia. Mercurial as he is, Putin will not risk that. As for NATO, their military assistance is extremely risky. They cannot meddle beyond a point. And if they do, Russia will escalate the war. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.